Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming to hear me talk about Bring Your Own Infra, BYOI. So my name is Davin, and before I start, I want to quickly tell you who I am, like why you should be listening to me for the next 10 minutes. So I'm employee number 5 at Airbyte. I'm a software engineer. I'm currently the cloud tech lead, which means I am responsible for the technical success of Airbyte Cloud and the Airbyte platform in general. And I worked on most of Airbyte's foundations, right? Most recently, the control data plane split, which we are going to talk about today. So why would someone want to bring their own infra? Why BYOI? What is BYOI, and how can Airbyte help you with that? So I want to answer this question by looking at the limitations of traditional SaaS, okay? So we see 4 different limitations with traditional SaaS. We see a loss of control, and we see limited customization, both of which really stem from the black box nature of traditional SaaS, right? That's both a feature and a bug. You're paying vendors, and so you don't want to care about certain things. That's fine. But with traditional SaaS also comes security risk, because your data is exiting your own infrastructure and going into their infrastructure. And from that, we also have compliance and audit requirements, again, because the data is leaving your infrastructure into their infrastructure. So any compliance and requirements the company or your organization is subject to, the vendor is now also subject to. And honestly, this is tough, right? It's tough to find vendors that fulfill all the requirements and are reasonably priced. So often people roll their own, right? Even though that's often a suboptimal solution. And all this really boils down to the problem of data having to leave your infrastructure, right? And with that note, what we're touching upon now is the idea of data control with your tooling, right? In this case, integration tooling. At Airbyte, we understand data control is very important to our users. And so that's why we have Airbyte open source, right? Not everyone wants to use Airbyte Cloud or can use Airbyte Cloud. And we want to accommodate users with self-hosted Airbyte, right? For many reasons. And so what's next, right? How do we retain this data control in the face of changing compliance, right? Without being overwhelmed by complexity and continue to deliver business value. So let me motivate this with a very simple scenario. So what I have here is a very typical data ingestion setup. I hope it's Airbyte. That's why I call it the data ingestion tool in purple. But it's fine if it's not. And so what we're doing here is pulling data, writing it somewhere, right? Very simple setup. Works. It's great. So now, what if the business comes to us with a new requirement, right? They say, cool, we're very, very successful. We're doing great. We're going to expand to the EU. And we now want to conduct the same data operations, including, right, the EU. And here I'm using the EU because I believe GDPR is the most widely understood sort of data requirement laws by data practitioners. So how do we handle this, right? The first way to handle this is, well, let's just not be compliant, which is a big no-no. We all want to run safe and responsible businesses, so we should not do that. That leaves us with 2 options. The first option is we run multiple identical deployments, right? So what we have before, duplicate it, right? As you see here on the slide, in the EU, right? And we have 2 parallel identical systems running to be compliant. This is bad because now we have operational and process complexity, right? We also have the possibility of drift for accidental leakages when people use the system wrongly. So it's not great. Second way of doing this is we do a lift and shift to the EU, right? So what we say is, all right, we move all the infrastructure to the EU, and through that, stay compliant. And this is okay, it works. However, it's painful and is not scalable. What happens if the business says, all right, now we want to be PCI compliant? Do we do the same thing? Make all the infrastructure PCI compliant, right? So both of them are actually bad options. And this is where the control data plane split can help us, right? So the idea behind the split is I take the architecture I cut into two pieces. The control piece that house all the complex logic, and we don't want to duplicate because it's difficult to manage and complex. And the data piece, right? Simple worker that we can move anywhere. Here we have Mickey's head as the control piece and his hands as the data piece. And with this, what we can actually do is we can keep the control piece in one place, right? So minimize the complexity with one Mickey's head and move the data piece around, right? Bring the workers to where the data is, right? And so here you see in this new diagram, what we have is a data plane in the EU, right? Trying to fulfill GDPR requirements, right? So here we're Mickey with multiple hands, multitasking Mickey. It's the general idea of the data control plane split. So let's talk quickly about the architecture because people do ask me about that. So this is the architecture before the split. You notice that everything is one blob in one Kubernetes cluster in one region. There's no intelligent way to talk about where work is happening, right? So with the data control plane split, now we have that way. And as I showed earlier with Mickey's head and his hands. So you notice that the big difference here is the workers can now exist in infrastructure separate from the control plane, right? In our example here, we have workers in an AWS Paris region, while the control plane is in GCP in a different region. And we have actually two data planes right on the right, there you can see. So what we have done to enable this is one, add a routing service that's actually routing jobs to the right queue that data planes are listening to and pulling from. So this is very much a pull model in order to get this to work. And we've made it so that the data planes are dumb, right? They're dumb workers that will fail fast on any problems. So if we see, for example, network partitions, the workers shut themselves down and they stop. And that's because Airbyte values data consistency, right, over everything else, right? We don't want to run into any cases where data is corrupted. So let's say you want to bring your own infrastructure, right? Like, what are the requirements? The requirements are just two things, right? Ability to run Docker containers and the ability to make outbound networking connections, right? And this is great because Docker is pretty universal, right? Which means that there's minimal custom needs here. And because there are no firewall changes, because it's only outbound internet connections, there are no firewall changes, which means minimal InfoSec requirements, right? You don't really have to talk to your security team or your IT team. Sorry, it just works out of the box. Great, so let me do a quick demo now to show you how this looks like in the UI. And so now I'm in the Airbyte UI here. So, and I've set up a connection, demo data plane, as we are trying to do today. And within this connection, you see I've actually selected what we call data residency. Here I've selected European Union. What it really means is behind the hood, this job will be routed to the Paris data plane, right? Or a data plane within the European Union. So what I'm going to do now is kick off a job, and everyone should be familiar with this UI if you guys have seen Airbyte before. Cool, and we see a job is running, and I'm going to switch to my terminal. Here I'm looking at all the Kubernetes pods in the Paris data plane right now. And you can see, hey, great, jobs are starting, right? And so the system works as the architecture said it would. So let me just jump back to my slides. And yeah, so today, after that demo, right, I started this talk with why we want to bring your own infra, like why BYOI is useful. We went to the limitations of traditional SAAS. We touched upon data control, and then we presented a scenario to really crystallize what we're trying to talk about, right? And so I hope I've led everyone to the same conclusion here that BYOI is useful because it brings a lot of business value, right? For two reasons. One, the data stays within the right infrastructure. I use the term right because in some cases, right means the vendor's infrastructure, right? For certain data that isn't sensitive, leaving it there and not worrying about it is the right move. For data that is a bit more sensitive, keeping that within your infrastructure is the right move. So it really depends on your situation. And the whole goal of this is to stay compliant while, again, minimizing complexity, right? And that's what we get with the control plane. We have one central configuration location, one single plane of glass, as we like to call it. And the hope or the goal behind all of this is to, again, be compliant, minimize operational complexity, and continue delivering business value. Thank you.